Hi everyone, my name is Kelly and I created this channel to be a source of sharing for stories of awakening, spiritual journey, and creating a community of sorts to make this process that can be fairly independent, we'll say. I don't want to use the word lonely, but no one can go through this process but you. No one can do it for you. No one can even tell you how to do it, because every person going through a spiritual awakening, their process is a little bit different. Their experience is a little bit different, we'll say that. But I do believe there is a process involved that can be understood in a collective sense, and shared so that the rest of us can understand the meaning in some of the things that happen in the process, acceptance even, and I'll go as far as saying embracing and being grateful for the experience and what is happening to you, because you understand the greater meaning and the gift behind it. So I wanted to, in this first video, share a little bit about who I am and the journey that I've been taking now for 2 years and 3 months, but who's counting? So I live in the Midwest, and I grew up in a family of atheists, really. So there really was no spiritual connection built for me as a child. And I don't really understand fully why, but during my childhood I was very disconnected, very dissociated really with the world. I had no outlet per se, at least from what I needed at the time for communication, a greater understanding of why we were even placed here. It just didn't feel like home to me. And I think the connection I did have, we'll say, to something greater than me was through music. And I played the piano and play the flute, but really through music I found some connection where I could escape and lose myself per se. And I played the piano every day. No one had to make me practice, and really it wasn't practicing to me, it was connection to myself, my soul. I felt something. I felt something when I was playing music, and I connected with that part of myself that could express emotion, and that was really what got me through childhood. I went to college for music and had a lot of opportunities there that really changed my life with regard to, I played in a jazz band and we traveled all over the world, and that created a path that led me down various other paths, as that does, as you take a step forward in one area, new ones are created. So so I was married, had a child, divorced, and actually divorced twice, which I don't enjoy talking about. It doesn't make me look like I know what I'm doing, which I'm not. My son is now in high school. I'm 47 years old. And just over 2 years ago, I had an experience where I had a significant long-term relationship for a couple years, and that person moved in to our house. And over the time period that they were there, and it was about 7 months. And now, mind you, this was really the only relationship that I had had to date that was, it was the best relationship of my life. It was the only one I considered, you know, significant. I was happy. It unleashed a lot of sides of myself that I didn't know even were there. And I became a better version of myself during that time. However, when he moved in, I just began getting sick and feeling bad all the time. Sick, depressed. I had never had that experience before before he moved in, but it was almost every day I felt that way for 6 or 7 months. And finally he said, it's obvious that you don't want me here. And it really was obvious that I didn't want him here. At least psychosomatically, everything about my body and being was screaming that was true. So he moved out, and the day after he moved out, literally, my life changed. So prior to that point, I had been truly living in my head, intellectual, guided from my own mind, thought, and like I said, there really was no spiritual connection. I didn't even really have a framework to understand what a spiritual connection was, really. So I can't describe the significance in turnaround from going from living like that to being someone connected spiritually. I didn't even use those words at that time, so the frame of reference was not there. So the day after he moved out, things started happening. The first day, a bat flew in the house, which had never happened before, and it was there for less than a day, and then gone before I could do anything about it. So it doesn't sound significant, but it felt significant at the time because the energy had completely shifted from that day to the next. And I looked up the meaning of a bat on the internet, and it said that bats are a symbol of rebirth, and it felt like I was being rebirthed at the time. And I couldn't explain it or understand why, but from then on, things happened that I consider miracles and changed my view of reality and view of the world. So in this video, I really want to give just an overview of my awakening process, but then get into more detail at another time, and perhaps dig into, because it's a very complicated process and story, so I don't want to dwell too much on any one event. But from that day forward, things started happening, synchronistic things. And for example, I pulled up to a stoplight, that next day, and I was really deeply pondering in thought about my new life purpose, in this new freedom I had. Literally thinking that thought very deeply, and turned to my side, and there was a van with the letter purpose all over the side, and I still don't understand how or what that van could have been advertising for, but it was so perfect in the timing that I knew that either someone or something was communicating with me, or at least the world was reflecting my inner thoughts. Okay, so that started a whole process for me of trying to figure out what was happening. And so those things just increased. I had signs, different animal signs, that occurred. And I don't want to get into too much depth into those, but I would search with the meaning of all of those things, and it always tied into something particularly important at that time in my life. And I just knew that they were a sign. So for the next 5 or 6 months, there was a whole process of that. So I started reading for hours every day. And I'd always been a reader, but I was reading about a really connection to finding who I was, peeling back the layers to get to who I really was. And there were books that focused on that, really connecting with your inner guide, your intuition, which I didn't even really understand the meaning of intuition and what that meant. I was completely in my head and not following any inner guide. So there was a whole process of months where I started beginning to understand what that meant. You know, my body would feel a certain way when when I was ready to make a decision that maybe went against what was best for me, or the opposite. I started noticing those bodily signs where maybe my stomach would clench up when I was going to do something that wasn't right for me. But there was a sense of ease when I was going to do something that was right for me. That's an example. So I also found a strange connection to sailing and the ocean, and sailing around the world. I even took sailing lessons at the time, not understanding why I was being, I guess, led in that direction, why I was just fascinated. I would read all these books about these young women sailing around the world, and just that adventure, and that I think it was metaphorical, but I didn't know it at the time. And at the time, my son and I discussed selling the house and moving to another area in town, just really making a fresh new start. And that was something he decided to do, and I thought, great. And there was so much to be done at the house, but at the time that he decided that, it didn't even bother me, knowing that it was going to be tons of work to get this place ready to sell. I was excited about it. So, and in that process of getting doing all these things, I redecorated, the house. It didn't even really need to be redecorated, but in thrift store purchases that were just things that called to me every time. Within a very short period of time, I pretty much redecorated, most of that house, and it made such a difference. It reflected who I was becoming, and that act of changing my physical environment, it reflected my inner environment, and I felt like it created change quicker. So I did that, and things were strange because I didn't need very much sleep. I would wake up in the middle of the night. I would literally sleep just 3 or 4 hours or less, and get up in the middle of the night and read or do things around the house to get it ready to sell. That had never, happened before. I mean, we're talking, I told you I was sick and sleeping a lot and depressed when my previous partner was living with us. And then all of a sudden, I'm full of energy, I'm up in the middle of the night doing things, for hours I would be working, doing things, reading, all of these things. It had never happened to me in my life that I had that much energy, and it was very unusual. And I would wake up often with insights, I call them messages now, but or remembering something from a dream that would guide me to the next step, or what I was going to do next. All new stuff. At that time, I also started having physical symptoms that were unexplainable at the time. For example, in my head, for example, I had the top of my head would itch, and I had headaches, and I would get out in the car driving, and the lights and the colors would just be blinding, blindingly beautiful, but still, like, I just couldn't look at things. Everything looked different. Everything was more vibrant. The colors were even different, but it was almost like it had a sparkle, or so bright. I would open the car door, grab the handle, and be sparked almost every time. I'd have to jump back. It was like an electrical spark. I would turn on and off light bulbs, and they would flicker off immediately. Just the spark, and then they're off. That happened over and over. I had asthmatic symptoms when I wasn't asthmatic. I had never been. They were symptoms. I went to the clinic at work, and they really didn't know what to tell me. They gave me a prescription I didn't fill, but it was just like a thickness in my chest where it felt like there was stuff being worked out, but it made me breathe real thick, and it felt like asthma. And then I was having heart palpitations, where my heart would beat really fast, or almost like having caffeine, even when I didn't, it was racing, heart was racing. So those were some symptoms. As I got the house ready to sell, once I put it on the market, it was very quick. It got an offer, and it was very quick, but right leading up to that, I was having very strange things happen in the house, over and over. The pipes were clogged, and the drains in the pipes, where you're flushing the toilet and taking a shower, they were clogged in the same way 3 times in a row, requiring a repairman to come every time. So that was one thing. Had never happened before. The washer and dryer, literally the washer and dryer, each of them broke 3 times. The repairman was laughing by the end of it. So the number 3 is significant too, but I didn't know that at the time. Each of the machines broke 3 times, and the drains were clogged 3 times, I believe. And none of these things had ever happened before. All of a sudden. Okay. So as we were getting ready to move, the night before, I took my son to his band concert, and as I was sitting there, I had started feeling like I had a little tickle, like when you're getting sick, or and as I sat there at the concert, I just began getting sicker and sicker, so quickly, though, that it went from a little tickle to about full-on pneumonia by the end of it, as sick as I'd ever felt. And I was so sick, my whole head was clogged, blowing my nose. Down through my throat was sore, my chest was congested, so congested it felt like I had pneumonia. I could barely breathe, and I had a fever within just an hour or two. It had never happened to me. You can see a theme with the psychosomatic, or the bodily signs that I had. And when I got home, I just had to lay in bed. I was so sick. And I was supposed to move the next day. I did have movers scheduled, but they were only going to move the big things. My son was in school the next day, and I was just planning to move the rest of the stuff by myself. It's kind of an issue for me. I always try to do everything by myself. It's not a good plan. I'm trying to work on that. But I was going to move everything else, carload to carload, right, to our new place. But if I was so sick, there's no way I could have done any of that. So I'm laying in bed, tissues everywhere, medicine, lying. I took medicine, just feeling horrible, as sick as I've ever felt. And I just started crying, and I just felt like I had been leading the life that I was meant to lead. I was following the signs and guidance I was being given. I did not understand it. I didn't have necessarily a frame of reference, but I was learning that there was more to this life than just you work, you work, you retire, you die, and there's nothing else really to it. I knew that there was something more. There was a greater meaning. I knew there was something else there that was communicating with me, because it was happening to me. And it probably was always there. I was just starting to pay attention and listen to it. So I felt like I was doing what I needed to do in my life, and I didn't understand, why am I getting sick now when I'm moving forward, in life. I'm committed on this path wherever it takes me, and I surrendered to that. I didn't have to understand it all. And that was the first time in my life that I had ever relinquished that control over everything. I had major control issues. I have my whole life, and I think that comes from fear and fear. So I started crying, and now at that time I wouldn't even say I was comfortable saying prayers like someone who has grown up in a church or on a spiritual path would. At that time I think I was referring to God as the universe, or other words that may have felt okay with me. And I kind of had a negative connotation with religion. There's just intuitively, I think I understand now, I didn't connect with any methodology that you had to look external to yourself for the answers and guidance, I suppose, to move forward in your life. It never felt right to me. And my family that I grew up in was the same, and I aligned with that. I really do believe that is true. So religion had always felt wrong to me for that reason, because intuitively I knew the answers were within, and I still believe that. So I'm laying in bed. I'm sick. I've got Kleenexes everywhere, blowing my nose, can barely breathe, have a fever, and crying, knowing that in a few short hours I have to move all of our stuff. And I didn't understand why this was happening, and I knew I needed help. And in that moment, I truly surrendered it all. And I asked God for help. I asked Him for help because I knew I needed help. And I acknowledged it. I asked for help. I'm crying and I'm asking God for help. And then I just stop and breathe. And in a few short seconds, a miracle happened to me. And I literally sat bolt up in bed when it happened, because I knew I could feel it happening. All of a sudden, at the top of my head, I feel a draining start happening. And the sickness, the congestion, the snot, everything just started draining slowly from my body. And I could feel the process. It wasn't an instant thing. It was literally a draining, a dissolving, we'll call it, all the way through my body like this. And it's happening. So as it's moving down, the parts of myself that it's leaving go back to normal. And it's going down through my chest. And as it does, they go to normal. The congestion disappears. It's gone. And it goes all the way through my body. And I would guess that took maybe 10 seconds. and I could feel it happening. It was the strangest experience that I've ever had, in a good way. And I was laughing and crying by the end of it because I had just experienced a spontaneous healing. Literally 10 seconds later, there was no sign of any illness at all anywhere in my body. The fever was gone, the congestion was gone, I could breathe, and everything was fine from then forward. I wasn't sick. The next day, got up and moved and did everything I needed to do. And I knew that if I hadn't asked God for help, I would still be sick. Now, I may have created those symptoms psychosomatically myself, sabotaging potentially due to fear of moving forward and not knowing where I'm going. I mean, I'm not saying that I had to have been sick, like it was some purpose, but when I asked for help, I got it. And there is no explanation for that illness disappearing like that. And from then on, I didn't look at anything the same. So at that point, and I'm going to skip kind of forward because there's so many details that can't go into all of them. We actually moved, and I had booked a trip to Costa Rica with my son, and we stayed at a sailing camp there. A surfing camp. We stayed at a surfing camp, so both of us could learn how to surf and just have a really neat vacation out of the country together. And so he was a great surfer. He learned how to do it, and it was just natural for him. Me, not so much. The first day we took a lesson, and the surfboard hit me in the neck. Hit me in the neck so hard, like literally right here, right where my voice box is, so hard that I couldn't speak for 3 days. And when I looked up the spiritual meaning of that, it was that, you're not telling your story. You need to tell your story. You need to share your voice. And quite honestly, that was so true, because for that 5 months, whatever prior, I had literally kind of kept to myself and not told anyone in my life what was going on with me. And I didn't even tell people that, my relationship ended. I told people nothing, so I wasn't sharing anything. And I got that message loud and clear, you need to do that. So came back from vacation, and I did start sharing my story. Now, people thought I was a little cuckoo. When I did that, everyone was nice, but I started sharing some of what was happening to me with people. I shared quite a bit of it with some of my Christian friends, and then some people that I work with and other friends. No one knew quite what to make of it, because I was really changing a lot. I mean, this is a very big, reset, really big change from who I was before. So in the next year, I'm not going to go into too much detail, but after we moved, I did a lot of learning, spiritual research, learning, meditating, and really started telling my story then. But I was ready to move forward. So I'll say 9 months after we moved, 9 months after, ended up going on a spiritual trip to Sedona, Arizona, and it was really a healing trip. And that was funny how I found that. I did one Google search on, I don't even remember what it was, maybe I wanted some type of spiritual healing, kind of finding yourself, that type of a thing. And I don't remember what I searched on, but this is the first thing that came up, and I booked it right away. And I had a whole week that was arranged for me based on what I was looking for. And there was an intuitive that I worked with that talked with me about that. And there were various things that I needed to heal from. Don't want to get into those details yet. I'll do it in another video. That I knew I needed to heal from at that time. And when I went on this trip, it was very healing. And the energy of Sedona, and I'd realized in that time that I have been an empath my whole life, highly sensitive to energy and other people's energy, and for my whole life had really absorbed and sponged in on everyone else's energy, thinking it was my own, and often it was negative energy. And it explained a lot to some extent about my childhood, because when you're absorbing everyone else's energy, it is hard to know which of it is yours, and you start getting a confused sense of even who you are. I related to other people's maybe identities, and I call it, shame, guilt, fear, all these other things I took on as my own as a child. So in that week, I knew that I wanted to connect more with who I was. I wanted to heal from some of the traumas and things that had happened that I knew were holding me back. And as I was there, the energy was like, I was just, it brings emotions, it brings things to the surface to be healed when that type of strong energy is there. And there are several vortexes, energy vortexes that are in that area. So it's a great place to go for healing and transformation. But as soon as I got there, I think I started, crying 5 minutes after I got there. Didn't even know why. It just really brings up things to the surface and makes it easier to heal from them. And some of the practitioners that I met just connected so much with them. And some I still keep in contact with. One of them in particular, her name is Sharon Wesh, and she did a session called Radiant Heart Healing, and her story is amazing. I'll talk about that in another video, but she's written books on this, and she's in her 70s, and just connected with her immediately as a mother figure, really, and soul sister. And we ended up having dinner and really just getting to know each other when I was there, and still kept in contact when I left. So when I left, I told my story to some coworkers, and at that point I was telling my story to everyone, but as I shared my story with certain people, I noticed that it was triggering within them. It was triggering an inspiration with them, recognition maybe of their own desire to go on their spiritual quest and their spiritual journey, and it triggered awakening in several people that I know. And that's one of the reasons I'm making this video, because I realized that sharing your story, just sharing your story alone, you don't have to teach people. You don't have to tell people what to do, because again, that's external guidance. And I really believe that the inner guidance should be your compass. But just telling my story triggered the spiritual awakening in others. And one of them even went to Sedona, booked their own trip through the same program that I used. And went on their trip, a couple months later. So it's just been an amazing process, watching others and realizing how connected we are. And I want to continue that and create a space for all of us to share and learn from each other. So after that trip and coming back, sharing my story, watching others, begin their journeys, I really felt like I'm ready for the next step, you know. And so there were several months after that where, and I kept receiving a message. And I will talk in another video about how I was receiving messages and how that has changed over time, etc. But I was ready for the next step, you know. And I remember praying, or you know, I remember feeling like I'm ready for the next thing. And for some reason I felt like I wanted a challenge, you know, and a spiritual challenge. And there were a lot of things that I read and that happened that were, of course, just at the right time that I needed them, but on that topic. And I did receive the message that, oh, you will get one, and you can't move forward until this happens, till something happens. And I didn't know what that thing that was going to happen was. But I was very just aligned with, it was very in the flow, very positive, very happy. I was even talking with my family, which was unusual because, again, they're atheists. I was even talking with my family about all the things happening, and one of my sisters in particular, you know, was interested in a lot of it. She would go and see a psychic with me, for example, and interested in the stones and chakras and energy and that type of thing. So everything was going really well, but I knew somehow that there was going to be a test coming. So I didn't know what it was, but I did get a shock when I found out what it was. So I had just had a pap smear, and the results took a long time to come back for some reason. And when they did, they came back, you know, abnormal, and that there were cancer cells. To be honest, I was not concerned at all. I don't know why. I just felt great, you know. I'm sure I'm sure I had a lot of support from the other realms at that time. And so I went to my doctor, a regular doctor, after I'd gotten the pap smear back from the work clinic. And he just visually said, you know, basically that you have cervical cancer. And he could tell. He did a biopsy, and I did. And because he could even see it, he said it was probably, you know, stage 2. And I didn't get upset. I didn't cry. I'm not saying that's good or bad, but I just didn't. As soon as he said it, I just thought, huh, really? We're going to do that? Well, I guess we're going to. Okay, so I knew that that was my test, but for some reason I was just shocked that that's what it was. I didn't expect it to be a health concern, mainly because I was technically, or at least I perceived myself as one of the healthiest people that I knew. I'd been a vegetarian for 17 years. I was active, you know, I worked out, I rode my bike, I did yoga. I mean, I was a positive person, you know, and I had done a lot of, you know, just work on myself over the years to kind of shift away from any negativity. And people looked to me, at me, I think, as someone that was positive. I just could not believe that happened. I was really like, I did believe it, but it, you know, I thought the test would be something else. And so right after I got the results, I went to my parents' house and I told, you know, told my family. And, you know, at first everyone was really upset. My mom was crying, and I was not crying still. I'm not saying that's good, but I knew beyond a doubt. I knew that this was part of my spiritual journey, and things were going to be fine. I didn't know at all what was going to happen or how. I just had complete faith. Now, if this had happened 5 or 10 years before, it would have been a complete mess. It would have been a totally different situation than it was for me at that time. But I had been told something was coming. I knew it was coming. I knew it was going to be okay, and I knew it was going to be part of my mission and part of my um, purpose here on earth. And that's really all that mattered to me. Now, I will say that from my spiritual beliefs that had evolved to that point, I didn't have a fear of death anymore from that perspective, like I would have years before. Now, I'm not saying that all of my fear had been purged by any means. I mean, I'm sure I still have fear there, but not like I would have. And I even said that, to my family. That I knew it was part of my path. Knew it was part of my mission. That I wasn't afraid of it. I wasn't afraid of, dying or, for all intents and purposes, I wasn't, and that it was going to be okay, and that please trust me. And when you leave the doctor's office, when you have a diagnosis like that, they give you paperwork. They tell you what to do. He had wanted me to meet with an oncologist and go through that whole process. Radiation, chemo, surgery, all of those things. And so as I was talking to my family, and we were talking there at their house for a couple hours or more, they could just see, as I processed the news, that my path wasn't going to be typical. And they started getting a little fearful themselves and unsure, because they had no idea what I was going to do. And neither did I. But I wasn't necessarily going to do what they told me to do. I was going to wait for the signs and guidance to come step by step, and it did. And so as they could see me, my perception kind of just shift into maybe not following the normal path, my mom said, "Please, will you just do what they tell you to do?" I'm like, maybe? So when I left their house, for the next few days, so I called work, and the biopsy came back, that it was positive and I did have cancer. And I took my boss is wonderful, and she's one of the ones I connect to spiritually, and she was great about the process. And I took a leave of absence from work, indefinitely. And so for the next few days, I kind of researched a lot of alternative and holistic ways to treat cancer. And so I was learning things, and I had friends that were on a holistic path that brought me things and kind of work with me on what to do. So immediately I kind of started juicing and doing that type of thing. And then I called my friend, Cher, in Sedona. And so ironically, she had the first holistic wellness clinic in Indiana in the 80s, and she was really a pioneer. And she had written books on healing, diseases like cancer, and through a holistic program. And she, for 40 years now, has worked with people in my situation and others where they have completely healed. So I knew that because I read her book. And I knew to call her, and I'm convinced now that's a lot of why I met her to begin with, because she was the principal party in beginning this healing process for me. So she said, "Kelly, you can heal this, definitely. Believe it, know it, and you will." And she said that you don't have to do what they tell you to do. I will help you, and we're going to do this. And I believed her. She and her husband happened to be going out to California the next week in several days, literally in like 3 or 4 days from when we talked. And so this clinic was a frequency healing clinic, holistic wellness, and they were going for their own health reasons. And I booked a plane ticket and stayed at the same hotel they were. And for the first week, anyway, they were both there with me, and it was an amazing process. And I'm going to get into that probably in another video. But that I stayed there for 2 weeks. They stayed there for 1. But in that 2 weeks, I feel like I got a degree in holistic wellness. The people that I met, the things that I learned, changed my life. So I did begin a detox program. And detoxing is really the process that allows your body then to begin healing itself. If it's too toxified, it can't. So you kind of have to peel back the layers of toxicity so that it can heal them one by one by one. Then to get to something as, I guess, significant as cancer, you have to heal the other things first. And so that's what I did. So I was at that clinic for 2 weeks, detoxing and receiving frequency healing. From there, I went back to Arizona. There's another clinic close to an hour away from where Cher lives in Sedona, that I went to this clinic, and I ended up being there for, I think, 7 weeks, and doing the same things, doing the exact same things. So finally, I knew it was time to come home. Now, mind you, I didn't have any tests. There were tests in California, but not in Arizona per se. I did have one kind of scan before I left that showed, that I was cancer-free. But I knew the exact day that the cancer was gone, almost to the moment. I knew it. I knew it with every fiber of my being that it's gone. And so coming back to the Midwest, coming back home to Indiana, and going back to work. So that was 5 months ago, I believe, that I came back, and the cancer is gone. And I've told my story. I know better than to not tell my story. I could get hit in the neck with something else next time. I've been telling my story. Others have, again, been inspired on their own journeys, and this channel and this video is 100% divinely guided. In fact, I've received the same messages 3 days in a row. Do this. You got to do this. Do it, and just do it. And, I have to stop putting it off. Making YouTube videos isn't anything that I ever thought I would be doing, but I watch YouTube videos for, a lot of reasons, but spiritual. There are people that I follow that provide really amazing information that help you learn what's happening with the energy on the planet. I've also watched a lot of videos about what's happening in the world today, with purging of some of the negativity. That's a whole other topic, but yes, I think my son has always wanted to have a YouTube channel. That is definitely nothing I've ever wanted to do, but I've been guided to do this, that I need to share this, the story. I need to connect with people who may be going through some of the same things. I'm not a teacher, I'm a sharer, and I don't know any more or less than anyone else, but this is a platform for sharing and learning, and that's really all I feel guided to do, and go from there. So if this message has resonated with you, great. If it hasn't, I hope that you moved on at the beginning of the video, because what you need at any given time will be presented to you just at the right time. If something doesn't resonate, move on, because you will receive the right message very soon if you keep looking. That's just the way this works. So thank you for listening. If you have comments, please leave them. But I really want to make sure this channel is only positive for everyone involved. And I will be putting out more details about some of the details of my journey that have been significant in the case that it may help some of you that have been going through the same things. So thank you. Until next time.